Welcome to the Altruistic Libertarian, advocate for a genuinely free society. I'm Anthony Wheeler, and today we continue our series on the proper role of government. Who benefits the most? One of the principal ironies of Western democracies is their focus on the underprivileged in terms of government spending and tax policy, when these are the people who have the most to gain from a genuinely free society. The weak, the stupid, the lazy, the uneducated, the unmotivated, the poor, and the ill all benefit tremendously and all out of proportion with what they contribute. These people have access to the benefit of every new invention: TVs in the past, cell phones today, increase in productivity, higher standard of living than the poor of the past, and medical advances, cancer treatment, HIV mitigation. These advances are made possible by the work of genius and the commercial expertise necessary to make them generally available. The wealthy are always the initial market for such advances, paving the way for widespread and affordable availability. Such things would never come about, not in a trillion years, if it depended solely on the lowly. Not only that, but the socialist paradise so many dream of would simply stunt the development of further wealth and innovation, leaving the poor in a stagnant pool of hopeless and changeless existence. The hardworking, innovative, and skilled will benefit tremendously as well, as their efforts will be amply rewarded in a generally free society. And of course the lucky. They always do well. Family and community support of the sick, the needy, and the unemployed. In a generally free society, those in need receive care from family, friends, and the community. Caregiving is a noble calling and returns value to both those in need and those able to help. So often needs are unique and are best provided by those who truly care, as opposed to a heartless bureaucracy. Within the impersonal government system, too often the precise needs fails to meet bureaucratic requirements and then go unfulfilled. Other times cases are misdiagnosed and intervention causes harm instead of help. All of these government-sponsored attempts to provide assistance are done with considerable administrative inefficiency and at great taxpayer expense. If enough people in society feel strong enough about helping the unfortunate to vote for such programs, then surely there would be enough people in a generally free society willing to contribute privately, absent coercion. Not only that, for those generally concerned about helping the unfortunate, voting for such programs, as Thoreau reminds us, does very little for the people in need. One of the principal concerns of those who support government support for the needy worry that absent such government programs, the good work would go undone, and the unfortunate would suffer unnecessary hardship. If the government doesn't do it, who will? If we don't design, fund, and implement a specific solution, it simply won't happen, these people think. This thinking carries over to other critical social needs, such as education, retirement, and health care. But consider this. What if another important social need, say the availability of bread, was considered so critical that we had to establish government programs and institutions to provide it? Government owned and operated wheat fields, processing plants, and distribution centers. Would that actually be necessary to ensure people had enough bread to eat? Would government ownership of the bread industry promise lower costs, better quality, and improved availability? Of course not. With government ownership, we would expect the opposite: fewer choices, higher costs, and occasional shortages. Nationalizing bread production would be a minor disaster. As it stands, nobody worries about getting enough bread to eat or finding what they want at their local grocery store. By some miracle, the activity of many private and uncoordinated, unplanned, and uncoerced people on farms and in businesses see to it that every grocery store in every American town and city gets stocked every day with fresh bread. By the same social processes, absent government dictate, including excessive taxes, the high cost administration, and the social damage done by such government programs, the needs of the poor, unemployed, uneducated, retired, and unhealthy would be cared for in the same low-cost, high-quality manner that bread gets provided today. The specifics as to how such needs might be provided for are unimportant, in the same way that understanding the specifics of how any set of social needs are currently provided by free individuals and institutions is unimportant to the actual delivery of those social needs. What needs to be understood is that such needs will be effectively addressed in a free society given the opportunity to freely do so. Charity. Beyond family and community, those in need can be provided by regional and national charities organized specifically to support societal deficiencies. Instead of relying on impersonal government agencies, staffed by individuals motivated by organizational priorities and not necessarily their needy recipients, people in need would rely on people who genuinely care about their condition and who operate within organizations freely funded and staffed by the like-minded. In a wealthy society, when many people earn far more than they need, charity provides a socially applauded means to help those less fortunate. Negligence and liability. One of the key principles for maintaining justice within a genuinely free society is the practice of holding people or institutions liable for harming other people. For instance, when a drug company sells a product that results in the death of a consumer, and that consumer has used the drug in the recommended fashion, the victim's family or the state can sue the company for damages. If the plaintiff wins the suit, the court orders the company to pay damages, in many cases a large enough amount to discourage such negligent behavior. This last bears repeating. The damages will be large enough to get the company's and the industry's attention. We discussed this in some detail in Chapter 17, relative to transportation. As a personal example, while serving as an executive in a telecom company, we owned a site that proved potentially hazardous to trespassers, particularly teenagers who might be tempted to climb the structure. After inspecting the site, we decided to rebuild the fence and clearly mark the danger in big red signs, both to deter entry to the site and demonstrate our corporate responsibility. The importance of this principle cannot be overstated. Instead of attempting to formalize laws and regulations to cover every possible scenario that would potentially strangle an industry, the consumers and citizens can rely on vigorous liability laws. The following from dictionary.law.com. Liability. One of the most significant words in the field of law. Liability means legal responsibility for one's acts or omissions. Failure of a person or entity to meet the responsibility leaves him, her, it open to a lawsuit for any resulting damages or a court order to perform, as in a breach of contract or violation of statute. In order to win a lawsuit, the suing party, plaintiff, must prove the legal liability of the defendant if the plaintiff's allegations are shown to be true. This requires evidence of the duty to act, the failure to fulfill that duty, and the connection, proximate cause, of that failure to some injury or harm to the plaintiff. Liabilities also applies to alleged criminal acts in which the defendant may be responsible for his or her acts which constitute a crime, thus making him or her subject to conviction and punishment. Example: Jack Jumpstart runs a stop sign in his car and hits Sarah Stepforth as she is crossing the crosswalk. Jack has a duty of care to Sarah and the public, which he breaches by his negligence, and therefore has liability for Sarah's injuries, giving her the right to bring a lawsuit against him. However, Jack's father owns the automobile, and he too may have liability to Sarah based on a statute which makes the car owner liable for any damages caused by the vehicle he owns. The father's responsibility is based on statutory liability, even though he personally breached no duty. Other examples include: a signer of a promissory note has liability for money due if it is not paid, and so would a co-signer who guarantees it. A contractor who has agreed to complete a building has liability to the owner if he fails to complete on time. The Steroid Principle. Externalities. Global warming. The Altruistic Libertarian supports certain activities to be banned and or outlawed by the government based on the Steroid Principle. In professional sports, notably American football and baseball, athletes once gained a significant physical advantage by taking steroids. In doing so, they became stronger, faster, and more competitive, but at the cost of serious long-term health issues, including premature death. Steroids have since been banned from professional sports. Without the ban, many more athletes would be forced to use steroids to remain competitive, or risk losing their short-term opportunity when competing against athletes willing to take the risk. This would lead to a major health crisis within professional sports and unnecessary pain and suffering. Instead, with the substances banned and compliance rigorously enforced, every athlete competes on natural terms and eliminates an additional risk to their long-term health. The same principle can be applied to industry. Polluting the ground, water, and air will often be the easiest and cheapest way to operate, yet would endanger the health of many. If strict regulations against such pollution are not enacted and enforced, any company that wishes to compete would be forced to pollute the environment or risk going out of business. When all companies are required to meet the same environmental standards, and those standards are routinely enforced, each company will invest a comparable amount of capital or expense to meet those standards. Under these circumstances, the environment will remain mostly untainted and citizens will be unaffected by detrimental pollutants. Some have even argued that companies can gain additional competitive advantages by significantly increasing their efficiency in meeting environmental standards. But not without cost. Every consumer of those industries will pay more for their products, ceteris paribus, to keep the environment clean. For the most part, this is a bargain that most people would accept. The same principle applies to more general cases like automobile exhaust or sewage treatment. As we learn more about climate change on a global scale, additional changes may be required and enforced to minimize the effects of global warming. According to David Grinspoon's Earth in Human Hands, the amount of CO2 already released into the atmosphere will cause inevitable change, regardless of what we do today. Even so, changes can be made to avoid further damage to the atmosphere and the oceans, and it may require the force of government to bring those changes about. Well, that concludes our show for today. Next time we continue our examination of the proper role of government. Until then, peace.